So my 8th grade friends today, we're focusing on a set of directions that tell us to find the zeros of the polynomial function. All right, so finding the zeros of the polynomial function, it's not real difficult. It's basically kind of just a combination of the things we've been doing the last couple of assignments. So when I look at the first one, let's say that the function of x, written as the f of x there, equals x squared minus 18x plus 32. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to factor this like I have before. Now it's x squared, so I know it's going to be x and x. And so now what I'm looking for, remember, is two numbers that multiplied together equal a positive 32. Two numbers that added together equal negative 18. So I'm thinking, well, what equals 32? Well, it could be 1 times 32, could be 4 times 8, could be 16 times 2, and that's all that comes to my mind at the top. So I'm looking, well, how am I going to get 18? Well, I'm going to have to work with 16 and 2 then. All right, so now the question is, though, are these going to be positive or negative? The answer to my multiplication problem has to be positive. So either both numbers here, both signs are going to be positive signs, addition signs, or both signs are going to have to be negative signs. Because if I have one negative and one positive, it would be a negative product. But I need a negative answer when I add, so that tells me that both numbers are going to be negative. All right, and sure enough, if I do negative 16 and negative 2, you add those two numbers together, negative 16 plus negative 2, you get negative 18. You multiply negative 16 times negative 2, and you get a positive 32. Well, now I just have to solve for the zeros. Well, if x minus 16 were to equal 0, then x would equal 16. If x minus 2 were to equal 0, then x would have to equal 2, which means x equals 16 and 2. All right, so let's look at another one. Let's say that the function of x equals x squared minus 14x minus 51. That looks like a good one. Well, once again, I'm going to have to separate that a little bit. I'm going to have to factor it, and I see that it's x squared, so I know it's going to be x and x, so that's not difficult to understand. But now, once again, what I have here is I have to find two numbers that multiplied together equal negative 51. Those same two numbers added together have to equal negative 14. So I'm thinking, well, okay, well, what's going to equal negative 51? Well, it could be 1 times 51. 51's not really in my times tables, but when I do some mental math, I can see that also 3 times 17 equals 51. Now, here's the catch that you have to think of. The product has to be a negative 51. To get a negative answer when you're multiplying, remember, one of the numbers has to be positive and the other one has to be negative. So one of the numbers has to be positive and one of the numbers has to be negative. So when I look at 3 and 17, I can see that that's going to work somehow to combine to get negative 14, because 17 minus 3 is 14. But I have to think, how am I going to get negative 14? It either has to be a negative 3 and a positive 17, or it has to be a negative 17 and a positive 3. Well, I want a negative 14, so I know that negative 17 plus 3 equals negative 14. So my positive number is 3, my negative number is 17. So far so good, but I have to find the zeros. We could have x plus 3 equaling 0. All right. And if x plus 3 equals 0, then x has to equal negative 3. And if x minus 17 equals 0, then x must equal 17, which means that my final answer is x equals negative 3, x equals 17. All right, let's look at one more example. 8th grade, and this one's going to look a little different, but it's not hard. Once again, the function of x equals, this time, though it says a negative x squared, we'll talk about how to solve that issue, plus 24x plus 180. All right, so that's kind of an interesting situation there with those numbers. But first of all, negative x squared. That really doesn't work because I don't want a negative x and an x. I just want x squared. Well, what do I do? If I want to do that and I want to make this a positive x squared, I'm going to multiply the entire trinomial by negative 1 because I don't want a negative x squared. I don't care if these are negative, okay? But I don't want a negative here. So when you have a negative here, you have to multiply the entire thing by negative 1. Which means, as we talked about with polynomials, when I multiply something by negative 1, all I'm doing is changing the signs. This negative will become a positive x squared. My positive 24x will become a negative 24x. And my positive 180 will become a negative 180. So I just rewrite the equation, okay, to just get a positive x squared. Now I factor it. Just like I have the other ones, it's x squared, so I know it's going to be x and x. And now I'm back to what I did originally. Now I'm looking for two numbers that multiplied together equal negative 180. And I'm looking for two numbers, those same two numbers have to be added together to get a negative 24. Now once again, just like in our previous example, our product has to be negative. The only way we get a negative product is to take a positive number and multiply it by a negative number. There's can't have two positive numbers or this would be positive. You can't have two negative numbers because a negative times a negative is a positive. And this is negative, so we need to have one positive and one negative. So now I've got to think, okay, what needs to happen, because I need two numbers that multiplied together equal negative 180. Well, what could that be? Could be 180 times 1, but that's not anywhere near a difference of 24. I know that 2 can go into 18, so that tells me that 20 can go into 18. And so that would be 20 times 9. Well, we're getting a little closer, but 20 minus 9 is still 11 or 29, so that's not working with 24. I can see that 6 can go into 180, so thus 60 can also go into 180. And so it's 60 times 3. Well, that's added together is 63, subtracted is 57. That's not going to work with 24. But if I can do 60 times 3, common reasoning should tell me then that I can do 30 times 6 as well. And I see that if I do 30 minus 6, I get 24. So it seems like these are the two numbers that I want, 30 and 6. The thing now that I have to figure out is, do I want negative 30 and that being multiplied by a positive 6? Or do I want a negative 6 and that being multiplied by a positive 30? I have to make that decision. Well, remember when I add the two numbers together, it has to equal negative 24. Both of these multiplied together equal negative 180. But if I added them, the only way that I can add them and get a negative 24 is negative 30 plus 6, which means that my negative 30 needs to come over here. My plus 6 needs to come over here. But remember what the directions are. We're finding the zeros. So my first thing could be that x plus 6 equals 0. Well, if x plus 6 equals 0, x must equal negative 6. I could also have x minus 30 equaling 0. And if x minus 30 equals 0, x must equal 0. Which means that the answers that I'm looking for are x equals negative 6 and x equals 30. Have a good day, 8th grade. Talk to you later.